with things going to DFT. So I was happy to look at vice chair. I thought it needed to be an elected member to stand as chair.
So, fellow members of the committee, Peter is happy to put himself forward as the vice chair, recognising that the chair should be ideally it should be from constituent authority. What do other members consider about Peter's as the vice chair?
Fine by me.
I'm hearing no dissension, Peter, so I would take that as being, unless there is a voice, again, any concern about that, I would suggest that you are identified as the vice chair. As we set out in the papers, that will need to be ratified at the first in-person meeting. So, colleagues, in terms of the elected members from constituent authorities, is there anyone who wants to put themselves forward for the position of chair at this point?
I was hoping, Martin, that would help in the basis that if it's an ad hoc committee anyway, and if they can't make it, we've got a vice chair, it would make it even easier for people to consider it's not going to be too onerous.
Yes. I could understand where you were coming from, Peter.
I think, Martin, since we obviously don't have to actually elect a chair today, it's really to have somebody who's to lead this inaugural meeting. The position of chair can be carried forward to the first full in-person meeting.
Okay.
Of course, if we have a vice chair, then if that's agreed, then we have Peter to lead today's meeting.
In which case, Peter, I think I can now look to you to help guide us through the remainder of the agenda, which, as it is the first meeting, is relatively light touch anyway. But Peter, you're in the chair.
Thank you, Martin. So we've dealt with item 3, I think, and so we move on to item 4, which is again, it's Julie to take us through.
If I might, Chair, what I'll do is I'll introduce this, rather than if Julie wants to deal with anything else. So just to say to the committee that you've got a short paper which reminds you of the context of how we got to where we've got to. In paragraph 3.4 of the paper, it sets out the committee's terms of reference. The paper also notes that when we had the members' working group that looked at the arrangements for the General Purposes Committee, one of the recommendations from the members' working group was that you as a committee should just reflect upon the terms of reference at your first meeting, which is what we're inviting you to do today. And then in 3.5, again, drawing on the work of the members' working group, there were a number of areas where the working group suggested you might, as a committee, want to just reflect upon. So the first point is whether there were any matters which you think the committee could be dealing with, which are currently dealt with by the board, although that doesn't include the matters that are solely reserved to the board. Another question could be whether you look to undertake functions of an appointment committee. Just mindful that in the last 12 months, TFN has gone through a recruitment process for both myself as the Chief Executive and the Chair, and it would perhaps be something that if we had the General Purposes Committee, you could have taken a leadership on that, including also, and then also about a question as to whether it's more appropriate for this committee to be dealing with, should there be any disciplinary issues relating to statutory officers. And finally, a question about whether or not the committee would be the ideally placed to help with the review of the Constitution governance arrangements. And again, that's something which I think as we move forward, Chair, when we're moving into the world in which we've got a co-sponsor relationship dealing with Northern Powerhouse Rail, we may well need to look at things on the Constitution as a consequence of that. And it does feel that the General Purposes Committee could be very helpful in that regard. So, Chair, it was those areas where we thought, well, the members' working group thought it would be worth just you reflecting on. Just to say and advise you that if you do identify any issues, then that would be something to be fed back into the main board, because ultimately it's the main board, the TFN board, which has the responsibility for the terms of reference. So, Chair, I hope that gives you a flavour of what we were hoping we would get under the conversation at this point.
It certainly does. So I think we are really focused in on paragraph 3.5 of the report at this point to see if anybody has any comments on any of the items in there. And if not today, to take them away and within a short space of time, Martin, to come back with some comments.
Yes, Chair. So, I mean, I think, should we think about there's a couple of specific ones. Should this committee be undertake the functions of an appointment committee when we would need it, and whether it's this committee which would deal with perhaps disciplinary issues if we had to take them on statutory officers? Those are two very specific things to consider.
What precedents do we have on appointments? We've had appointments previously, and we've had ad hoc appointment boards appointed. We've tended to have observer status within there as well, within those appointment boards. DFT in particular have attended. The chief executive has attended. But we've had generally elected members and a LEP representative. But the appointment committees so far have generally been balanced in terms of political colour, for fairness. So as long as this General Purposes Committee does that, we're okay. Is it possible we could select people from the General Purposes Committee, for example, to sit on that appointment committee?
Julie, can I just look to you? Because I think the answer is if this is about saying, does the committee think it's appropriate to be, if you like, responsible or have the function of an appointment committee, and therefore it would be in its remit to decide how it discharged that remit?
Yes, it would be possible to have a subcommittee of the General Purposes Committee. Obviously, we'd have to look in some details about how we might set that up. But if that's what members would look to do in principle, we can look at that in more detail. But yes, in principle, a subcommittee can be formed from a committee.
Well, that would seem, putting in place a structure like this would seem to give us a quick way of achieving that sort of objective in a short space of time. So that would seem sensible in principle to me. Anybody got any objections to that approach? Okay.
Then the next issue, Chair, was about whether this committee should undertake a function, if it were required, associated with disciplinary issues relating to statutory officers. Of course, that would be something that we then would refer back, your recommendations, I guess, would refer to the main board, but it would give you the opportunity to be the first point of contact or first channel in that situation.
I haven't come across any precedent for that during the existence of the organisation. Therefore, this is new ground. But there may be occasions where we need to have such a committee. And again, subject to the same points as I've made before, it would seem that this body could quickly move to deal with such issues.
Okay.
That's the wish of the members. Right, Susan.
Do we not already have stuff? Because in a local authority, I'm sure Carl will be the same. We have a staffing committee which deals with complaints against staff and that which is made up of councillors who are ready to take that responsibility when it comes. I would have thought this is already set up at the beginning, really. That you already have something for this kind of purpose.
Is it
certainly, if there isn't one, there needs to be one, certainly.
Is it statutory officers, though, we're talking about? People that are actually got a statutory function as opposed to being an employee? Is that what we're talking about?
That's correct, Chair.
It is for different purposes.
Right. Okay. Carl?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I was just going to say, if we haven't got such a thing set up, it makes sense to incorporate it into this, so at least it's there, and you don't have to then think of an ad hoc arrangement if something does happen.
Okay.
I think that's one of the key points, as Councillor Hinchcliffe says. Normally, you would find you've already got that sort of arrangement within the structure, but at TFN we don't have that at this stage, and I think that's something that has given rise to this conversation.
Susan.
So we do need something in the constitution about staff discipline, how we do that, and what appeals there are, who does the work, if somebody's implicated, how do we go outside the organisation to an investigation? All that needs to be somehow written down. I'm not sure if it is, but...
So all of those processes are indeed in place, Councillor Hinchcliffe. This is specifically in relation to statutory officers, which at the moment, if there were to be any issues, it would at the moment have to be considered by the main board. So the suggestion is that in relation to statutory officers, it would be a function that this committee could take on behalf of the main board.
So my only comment to that, Martin, is if there is a general disciplinary matter against a member of staff, but not necessarily in the course of their duties as a statutory officer of the organisation, how does it work in terms of priorities? Does it always, if it's a statutory officer, have to be dealt with through the main board, or can it be dealt with through normal disciplinary channels? Where's the boundary? How's it work?
Julie, this is in relation just to the statutory officers, isn't it?
Yes, because there is actually a legal process laid down which needs to be followed for statutory officers, and we have that in our constitution at the moment. What we don't have at the moment is any alternative way of following that through other than board. So there's kind of a gap in our governance structures to that extent at the moment. And happily, we've not been in a situation where that has caused any issues at the moment. But it is something that we would need to look at and put in place a structure more akin to what you would find in any other local authority.
So do we need to just see what those procedures look like in the Constitution? Because I haven't seen the Constitution in that respect, and what the proposal is. Is it simply that there is delegated power given to this committee to undertake that function?
Well, I think what we're looking for is a steer from members as to whether you'd see something separate being set up for that, or whether you'd see that as part of the overarching function of the General Purposes Committee. Now, either of those obviously would be possible, but clearly, as you've already alluded to, it would be simpler to encompass that within the role of the General Purposes Committee by means of a subcommittee.
Okay, that would seem sensible to me because of the unwieldy nature of the main board. Okay. So we'll work up some further proposals on that, on the basis that people are happy in principle that the General Purposes Committee could assume that role. Okay.
I think that helps give us a steer on that, so thank you.
And then I'll let you carry on, Martin.
I was going to say, and then, Chair, there was a question about whether the committee feels it would be helpful to have a function in helping review the constitution and governance arrangements, and thereby making recommendations to the board. And I think, as I alluded to in the introduction, I think I can see that there is going to be a need to look at some aspects of the constitution and governance, particularly as we take on the role of the co-sponsorship, because there needs to be that kind of linkage in a way that we've got linkages with the Rail North Partnership. So I think this is an area where we will need and look for some involvement from members from the board, and using the General Purposes Committee I think would be a very helpful way of doing that, because then you would be providing that input and allow and what would come out of that would be then recommendations to the main board. So I think this would be an area where you could add value, and I think it's one where we probably need to work with you quite quickly because of the changes that are going through at the moment.
Okay. Carl.
Just to ask the question, is that not a function of the Audit Committee, or does the Audit Committee only look at financial governance matters?
I was sorry, Martin. Can I?
By all means, Ian.
Yeah, I was just typing something to Julie in that regard. We do have an audit and governance committee. It's not an audit committee. It's supposed to cover constitution as well. So I guess that's something that would need to be picked up, Chair, when if this is taken forward as to exactly where the delineation was between those two committees. I think it's reasonably clearly set out in the constitution what the audit and governance committee is responsible for.
Okay, so we need some clarity of those respective roles, but the word unwieldy is important again, because using the main board is unwieldy, and therefore to have some sort of body like this committee or audit and governance would be sensible to deal with those. What if anybody felt particularly strongly about some aspect of that? I mean, it would come to the board and they could raise their objections, couldn't they? I guess is the answer. You know, if something was put forward by General Purposes Committee or Audit and Governance, it would go through the normal procedure, would it? Would it be approved by the board?
I think that's one of the reasons that we need to clarify the role of the General Purposes Committee, because its terms of reference are quite wide at the moment. So it might be worth members just having a look at those terms of reference. We need to identify how the relationship with between board and General Purposes Committee is going to work going forward, because as you'll see from the breadth of those terms of reference, there is a possibility that on some occasions General Purposes Committee could make decisions itself without necessarily having to refer to the board. But I think what we anticipate following this meeting is that there will be a report back to board with the recommendations of this committee as to how it's envisaged that relationship should work, and obviously board would need to approve that before that went forward.
Okay, thank you. Susan?
Yeah, I mean, it's been alluded to already, but I just think it's important at this juncture, when we're going into a different kind of body, that there is a bit of a review of our governance arrangements. I don't know if that's already in train. Have the Corporate Audit and Governance Committee done that already? Have they set that in train? Or because I don't think we're the General Purposes Committee, from our standpoint, aren't fully sighted on the whole organisation and the committees. So I do think it's up to our legal person, which is Julie, is it presumably, commissioning somebody for us externally just to have a look at how we operate and then giving recommendations from there.
I think, Chair, if we take away from the conversation this far, that we just take away this point about being clear about just checking whether the role that's needed in terms of governance arrangements remains with audit and governance, or whether we need to suggest a change of that. Let's take that one away, rather than trying to because again, the point here was to get a feel from the committee about where they thought the committee could add value. And I think what I'm hearing is a rightful check from the members to say, we've got the audit and governance, we just need to make sure that is, if it's functioning and it performs the role we want, then that's fine. If there's something that's missing, we need to just have that conversation. So if we can take that one away.
Yeah, we should take that away and make sure that anything we propose doesn't lead to things becoming more opaque rather than clearer. So that would be great. So was there anything else in 3.5 you wanted to cover now?
It was whether the committee, any members of the committee had from their experience with the TFN works, whether there was anything which they thought should be perhaps considered as something that the committee would be involved with. We're not necessarily looking for a long list, Chair, but it's just giving the committee the opportunity to try and say, we have the General Purposes Committee now. Are there things that you would want to think about and consider?
I think it's helpful that we have members' working groups that are specifically constituted when there are issues of concern, because then you get the people best suited to deal with those issues. So I think they work well. We've got a number of examples of those at the moment. And I've not come across any other issues apart from the ones highlighted here. and even some of those I've not actually come across in practice in the time I've been involved, which is pushing on for 4 years now. So say that we've probably captured the main ones there.
Okay.
Unless anybody's got any thoughts. Okay. If you have any thoughts, then feed them back by within a short space of time, and they can be taken into the mix.
I would say if there's anybody that's got immediate reactions, Chair, then if they could let us have it by the end of this week, because it's probably the kind of thing where members will think of something that relatively straight away. And then, Chair, the only other thing was to just kind of reflect on the contents of paragraphs 3.6 and 3.7 about arrangements for meetings. As I said by way of introduction, we anticipate this committee meeting on an ad hoc basis. We would anticipate it taking place face to face, and then our suggestion is to think about how you adopt an approach for where you meet. We've made reference to the fact that the board has identified either Leeds or Manchester as its convenient locations for the main board. It's just a question of whether this committee wants to reflect upon adopting a similar approach or wants to consider any other arrangements.
Okay. I'm not a big fan of ad hoc things, because ad hoc things don't often actually happen in practice. I'm a bigger fan of putting meetings in the diary and then taking them out because they're not required. Because people's diaries are busy, and when you try to do something ad hoc, you find that only half the people are available, as we've found with appointments, for example. It's been very challenging. So, Carl.
Peter, I agree with your point there. That wasn't why I put my hand up. Just putting my hand up was to say, now that I've taken 2 years to actually learn how to do virtual meetings, I'm actually quite a fan of not having to travel so far. So I just wonder if there's any possibility that we could actually have hybrid arrangements.
Yeah, I think meetings are like this are very, very productive. There may be occasional issues where it's agreed that we should meet face to face because of the particular subject matter or importance. But we could decide that, but we could make it virtual to begin with, if that was the wish.
Julie, can you just advise on the current situation with regards to hybrid meetings?
I can, Martin, yes. As members probably know, it's something that we've been investigating within TFN. Thus far, we've not been able to finally establish the technology we'd need to do that. And as I've indicated to members previously, even if we could do that, we would have to take some care with quorum issues if we were to have hybrid meetings, because clearly if we don't have a quorum in person, then we don't have a fully quorate in-person meeting. And if we are going to be taking actual decisions at General Purposes Committee going forward, then we do need to have a quorate meeting. So we're obviously keeping a close eye on what's happening on the legislative position at the moment, which hasn't changed over the past almost 2 years from when that legislation was brought in. At the moment, clearly we can have consultation calls on a virtual basis, but they are not able to make actual decisions. So a lot depends on the actual agenda that we'd be looking at for a General Purposes Committee in terms of how we could hold it. I mean, subject to any comment Martin may wish to make, we could put 1 or 2 meetings in the diary if you would prefer us to do that, and then, as you say, remove them if they prove not to be needed. I can see the force in that argument. It's a matter for members. I think if you feel that's the better way to do it, then we can do it that way. But I think with hybrid, we do, as I say, we haven't got the technology to do that at the moment, and we would have to take some care with the idea of hybrid meetings moving forward if General Purposes Committee is to make decisions, which clearly it is being set up to do.
Susan.
Yeah, I was just thinking, the staffing committees, for example, only meet on an ad hoc basis if there's something to do, so they don't meet regularly. So I'm not sure how much use a regular meeting would be at this stage, unless there's a purpose for running one. I take what Peter says, but if there's nothing to discuss, there's nothing to discuss. I'm fine with hybrid or in person or online, whatever is easiest for anybody. I'm multifunctional.
So am I right? Sorry, to Julie, am I right that the General Purposes Committee is treated the same way as TFM Board, that it has to meet in person to be quorum?
Yes, the same as all the other committees as well.
Same as the committees, okay. So is there some merit in attaching a General Purposes Committee to the front end of a board meeting the same day, for example, when people are going to be together, or more likely to be together? It might be more challenging if the board meeting's at 11 and people have to travel long distances. So it might have to be a separate.
I'm not on I'm a deputy on TFM board, so not always there.
No, you're not always there, are you? No.
I think, Chair, let us take that one away to think about it as in terms of what a proposition might look like. I think I'm hearing that there's merit in protecting some space in members' diaries for meetings, but I'm taking the point that we wouldn't want to have too many of those, because the likelihood is we may not need them, but it may be helpful to have one or two meetings in the diary at a suitable point to have available, but then be able to call ad hoc meetings if circumstances arise. I think the point about hybrid meetings, we can take that away as well, but it's that point about if this committee is taking decisions, you need to have a quorum in person to be able to take decisions.
Okay. Yeah, we're going to take it away. I mean, having listened to what everyone has said, having something in the diary that's sort of once every four months, say, is going to always mean that the issue comes up sometime when that 4-month period's not at an optimum point. So we end up setting up a meeting ad hoc, which is what Susan's just said, really, if we need one. So I'm perhaps on balance, I'm flexible. This face-to-face meeting when we need it might well be better.
Okay.
If anybody disagrees, that's fine. But it sounds like we've got to meet face-to-face, and it sounds like we've got to meet when we need to meet. Now, arrangements, that was 3.6. Was there anything in 3.7?
Julie, in terms of 3.7, that's just talking about the relationship with the scrutiny committee, isn't it?
Yes, I think that was only there because we indicated that in board reports we'd have something to reflect scrutiny's input. So it's just, yeah, there's nothing more to consider on that today.
Thank you. So, Martin, does that cover 4 to your satisfaction? And Julie?
I think it covers from my perspective. Julie, does it cover everything you wanted to cover as well?
I think so, Martin. Yes, I suppose the only residual question is whether we should set up another face-to-face meeting of General Purposes Committee at this stage, or at a date to be confirmed, or whether we just essentially wait at this stage to see what further business comes up for the committee.
I think what we need to do is we need to report back from this meeting to the TFN board on the 30th of March, don't we, Julie? I would suggest that we organise a face-to-face meeting of this committee at some point thereafter, so that the board can this committee can formally appoint its chair and confirm its vice chair, and there will no doubt there may well be points that the TFN board want this committee to look at. So there's a specific reason for meeting in addition to the chair and the vice chair. But I would suggest that's how we take it forward, Chair, for today.
Thank you. Yeah, that sounds fine. Anybody else got any points they want to raise? No? Excellent. So I think that's it then. Thank you very much for your
short and sweet, Chair. It was always going to be for the first conversation.
Of course.